Welcome back to our series working through the books on the shelves behind me as we explore their methodology, not just their content. We've been building something systematic here through these videos, moving from logical construction through historical development to Marx's dialectical method for grasping how abstract organizing principles become concrete material forces. Last week, we spent a lot of time and established Marx's movement from the concrete to the abstract to the concrete, his distinction between investigative and presentational modes, how this method reveals systematic relations that develop historically while maintaining an internal logical necessity, as we've seen before. Today, we're actually going to work through this, and we're going to do it in an action through action, and this method through David Harvey's analysis of concrete. Harvey reads like prophecy today, but when he first gave this talk to the Harvard University Graduate School of Design, he was very much commenting on things that were alive and changing around him.
It's not often I get invited to Harvard, and actually I'm quite proud of that fact, but in this instance, I'll forgive you.
The good news, you can go listen to all of this. And the talk is really as good as the book. It's the book. I'm going to be cutting back and forth from that talk because I do think it's the perfect way to onboard this type of thought to those who aren't familiar with it. It's basically a masterclass in So here is basically what we're going to be walking through. In this talk, Harvey analyzed China's overcapacity in concrete and steel production, and he predicted they'd need spatial expansion to absorb surplus capital that required efforts far beyond the borders of China, specifically mentioning infrastructure projects like rebuilding the Silk Road route from Shanghai to Istanbul via Tehran. But this wasn't some guess. This was dialectical analysis revealing systematic tendencies before they fully manifested. Today, as we watch infrastructure competition between whatever Trump is doing these days and China's new Belt and Road initiative, as energy infrastructure becomes a weapon in the Ukraine war, as climate policy becomes the new arena for spatial fixed competition in Europe, Harvey's methodological approach cuts through the liberalized international relations moralizing, bullshit realpolitik talking heads, to reveal the systematic logic driving infrastructure imperialism, regardless of political systems. Because here's the thing, the question isn't whether these are good or bad policies. The question is, why does capital systematically, continually generate these patterns? Harvey's answer demonstrates Marx's dialectical method in praxis, while extending it through his concept of spatial fixes that reveal how capital's crisis tendencies move geographically in space, not purely temporally. Okay, now remember Marx's distinction. Investigation appropriates material in detail, analyzes developmental forms, and traces inner connections within the system. It's only after this work that you can present the systematic logic that makes development intelligible to us. Harvey's work, his talk here, Abstract from the Concrete, demonstrates this process perfectly. So step one, appropriating the material in detail. Harvey doesn't start with theory. He starts with a fact.
I want to start with a simple fact, which astonished me and continues to astonish me. Between 1900 and 1999, the United States consumed 4,500 million tons of cement. That's in 1 century. Between 2011 and 2013, China consumed 6,500 million tons of cement. That is, in 3 years, the Chinese consumed 50% more cement than the United States had consumed in the whole of the preceding century.
As an aside, I'm not sure how much I can restate or overstate the brilliance in using literal concrete as an example of starting with the concrete. That is ridiculous. Starting with the concrete. To refresh, abstract and concrete are terms you need to be familiar with. Abstract elements are isolated conceptual things that aren't really about the way things work, but they give us something, a singular idea that can be considered in itself. Concrete things are actually the space of interactions where rubber meets the road, for example, or shit happens. For example, if I burn myself grabbing a hot pan, there's nothing abstract about that. That's the concrete thing. It sucks. Get me some water and ice in a baggie. Give me that. If I say to you, well, this pan is 400 plus degrees, yes, this is the abstract thing, the temperature. I can burn my hand on 400 degree carbon steel, but that 400 degrees, it's divorced from everything. It isn't the thing that makes this concrete, right? And Harvey immersed himself completely in concrete, both the material and the part of the process. He went through USGS geological surveys, International Monetary Fund employment data, municipal data reports, raw material price indices, construction statistics in Turkey and Dubai and everywhere. This is more, though, than just data collection. Harvey lives in the material. He feels how it moves and connects. He traces cement consumption, and he connects it to steel production, steel to mining activity globally, mining to terms of trade and how that changed, trade patterns to employment shifts, employment to political stability concerns within countries. And each piece of data reveals a connection to every other piece within this systematic totality. And here, he makes a point I want to linger on. As he says, he wants to know why. Why did this massive expansion of concrete use hit China now? Why was it brought about? Why was concrete the thing? Why? And the problem is, as he says, we tend not to ask why. We used to. He smiles, and he says they used to make wild suggestions and swing for the fences, sometimes missing, sometimes very badly. So now we instead ask how, which is good, sorta. It stops us from starting with grand narratives, a place of assumed things. So we also ask where, which also helps us focus on sort of hyper-local particular interactions and get to some really amazing details. But
I think we've had a bit too much concentration on the question how. Because whenever I ask somebody who's been very deeply involved in a how story, well, why did it happen? The answer always comes back, it's the same. It's complicated. And you say, well, yeah, I know it's complicated, but you've got to tell me why. No, you can't, because you've got to deal with the complications. And I'm kind of going, I get a bit impatient.
The other challenge is that by getting stuck where the where or the how itself is some grand reason, you might end up with the kind of narrative-driven bullshit that pushes xenophobia, smuggling in an anti-Chinese sentiment just by bringing up China as a place. It's gross. It happens. So he wants to walk us through the why. Cement? Cement is used for construction. In 2016, there was an unprecedented global investment in construction projects globally. If you were traveling, you saw it. China handily led the pack. I had a weird experience myself. I was driven through a ghost city, and I will never forget the experience. It will sit inside my brain forever. One little store, and all of this. It was wild. So, with construction, which was everywhere, you'd expect a huge increase in steel, which of course isn't on the forest floor, so you'd have to expect an increase in mining, all sorts of minerals and things. Globally, all of the places you'd rather not happen with all those horrifying knock-on effects. If you're in America, you know. If you've ever spent time in Appalachia. If you didn't, you might not know the entire groups of mountains. They're not there anymore. Here, I'm going to actually let Appalachian Voices, a group you should check out, fill you in.
All this is new in the last year and a half or so.
Yeah, this wasn't here. I did a copter flyover about 14 months ago. This wasn't here.
No, it's just escalating exponentially. And all the people that visit Mars Fork don't see this. All those people.
We're getting pretty specific so far. He's going to be taking us through elements that need to be considered together. Drives behind the thing and the drives of those drives and so on. He does this so he can kind of kick it up a notch. Because Harvey is focusing specifically on how spatial the things are that we do. The spatial realities of social worlds. These things, as it exists, are used to combat issues, problems, issues themselves that have an internal logic through which each generates its own transformation. Examples he gives that I love. Paris in the 1850s. If you go to Wikipedia, the first thing you'll see is that Napoleon was a great man who told Georges Eugene Haussmann, his prefect of the time, to bring air and light to the center of Paris. That's good enough for some. It's good enough for Wikipedia. But no, that's not the driving force. God damn it. If you've ever seen the image from Les Mis, the musical right-wingers fetishize, but none of them understand, where the barricades are built, where tons of shit's thrown into narrow streets and rebellions use them to fight. Yeah, this is actually the push. This is the reason. And the push for that, well, again, surplus capital was everywhere. They had very few employed workers who became restless. Napoleon III and Haussmann solved this through a huge deployment of capital in urban reconstruction. Huge boulevards, department stores everywhere, and they transformed basically all of these alleys and narrow roads into this crazy new way of doing an urban consumerism. But this required new forms of debt financing, credit institutions that weren't there before. And this worked for a while until debt accumulation reached a breaking point. It only took about 20 years, leading to municipal bankruptcy, Haussmann's resignation, unemployment, unrest, and ultimately the Paris Commune. But how about America in the 1950s, 100 years later, post-World War II America, faced similar overaccumulation problems. There was a massive productive capacity from wartime productions. There were millions of demobilized veterans who now needed employment, and a workforce of women who took to the factories during the war, now needing employment too, not wanting to go back home. The solution, well, yeah, debt-financed suburbanization on a national scale. Interstate highways, metropolitan restructuring, suburban lifestyle creation, new mortgage finance institutions. This shit absorbed surplus capital and labor for a couple decades. About 20 years again. Creating this golden age of capitalism. But after that 20 years, the stresses again were apparent, leading to an urban financial crisis. New York City basically almost went bankrupt in 1973 to 75. And overall, we started to see with Carter a general capitalist restructuring of the entire economy. China, for the last 20 years, 2008 crisis basically threatened China with unprecedented numbers of job losses as export markets collapsed. So what was the response? Unprecedented urbanization and infrastructure development. They built high-speed rail networks that it's absurd to even talk about the numbers. They had 2007, right before this, 0 miles. 8 years later, 12,000 miles of it. Whole new cities popped up in this time. Massive construction projects, bridges and roads and tunnels, dams. This absorbed the unemployed workers. that were going to be an issue, something like 20 million or so, and ended up making sure that the net job loss was only about 3 million. That's crazy. This is not Harvey recounting moments in history. These aren't facts. He's tracing an internal logic through which each spatial fix contains contradictions that generate the necessity for larger scale spatial fixes in turn. Every solution I've talked about creates problems, conditions for crises at expanded scales. The systematic relationships linking apparently separate phenomena become very visible. On the one hand, we have an overaccumulation that connects to unemployment. It threatens the political stability of things. Fears connect to this massive infrastructure investment, and that connects to new debt instruments, which connects to municipal finance stress, which connects to debt crises, which connects to social unrest, which connects to new form of crisis displacement. Ouroboros shit. These are not external, abstracted causal relationships. It's not how this works. They're systematic connections impossible to identify without a comprehensive look and understanding at the stuff on the ground. Each element exists here through relationship to all of the other things that exist here, the total structure of the way capital accumulates. Harvey, in his work, discovers that spatial fixes aren't really policy choices like they're talked about when they happen and they push them. They're systematic necessities generated by the stress of the system itself. Accumulation in capital for accumulation's sake creates periodic overaccumulation, and that threatens social stability, creating spaces of crime, poverty, riots, and anger, forcing spatial displacement of surplus capital and labor through debt finance construction, which resolves temporarily the crises while creating new problems and new stresses at expanded scales. Boy, I wonder if I can think of anything.
We begin tonight with a nation already on edge in the coronavirus pandemic as protests turn violent across America.
What is England coming to?
The street battle seen here in Plymouth yesterday could be replicated in other towns and cities tomorrow night.
It is a protest movement that's spreading. This is the University of Southern California.
Once he's completed this investigative work, he's moved from this deep concrete thing to this abstraction. And Harvey reconstructs what he's discovered through Marx's presentational method. He begins with the simplest abstract determinations. Remember those things that are disconnected? He develops them through internal contradictions, reconstructing concrete totality. This isn't done with a complex geopolitical analysis of statistics and books, but with the simplest abstract determination that appears in all the more complex spatial relations. Overaccumulation. You'll get used to this if you read these books. Capital's drive to this endless accumulation, this systematically produces more capital than can be profitably or productively invested in markets. That's how it always has worked. This creates surplus capital and surplus labor seeking profitable employment. Overaccumulation isn't an economic problem only. It's a political, a social one. Unemployed workers are a social instability. Surplus capital creates speculative bubbles. Both of these threaten the social relations we live in. The internal contradiction of a thing, that's a term you're going to hear a lot of people talking about. That's the thing super important here. Well, Harvey walks us through it. He walks us through how overaccumulation and capital contain contradictions that seem only to have spatial solutions as the solution. First contradiction, for example, temporal versus spatial solutions. Capital can solve overaccumulation temporally by waiting for new markets, new tech, new investments to develop. Or it can do it spatially, which moves to new areas, new territories, expanding cities, finding new spaces to do things. But temporal solutions, they're basically risking social unrest due to unemployment, drug use, crime, and all these things. Well, spatial solutions require a huge massive, actually, infrastructure investment that creates new overaccumulation problems. Second contradiction, fixed versus mobile capital. See, spatial fixes require enormous investments in fixed infrastructure. Highways, railways, buildings, warehouses. These things can't be moved when problems show up in another state, another city, another area. This creates spatial configurations of fixed capital that become barriers to future capital mobility. This generates pressure for larger spatial fixes because that shit's not moving. So temporal issues are still a part of this. Yeah. The third contradiction is kind of a new interesting one. Value versus anti-value creation debt. Follow me here. Debt finance spatial fixes create value through employment and production and construction, but simultaneously create the conditions for the next problem through debt accumulation. If production doesn't materialize to the point that it can take care of that debt, well, every spatial fix creates the conditions for the need of another spatial fix the next time around. And at this point, we can talk finally about abstract things, the spatial fix. The spatial fix operates as abstraction. It's also kind of something concrete. It's a concrete abstraction. Harvey talks about this. It's abstract because it represents capital's general tendency to resolve overaccumulation through geographical expansion. It's concrete because it takes very specific contingent historical forms, Parisian boulevards, American suburbs, Chinese high-speed rail networks, all of that. It's both the idea separate of things, but also something I can point to very contingently as the event itself. Harvey's presentation culminates in reconstructing contemporary global capitalism as systematic unity, basically every spatial setup, like that meme. It's all spatial fixes always has been, right? All the way down. We have at the city scale, we have Haussmann's Paris, which solved overaccumulation through municipal scale urban reconstruction. We have the national scale, where American suburbanization solved overaccumulation through metropolitan integration across the country. At the global scale, Chinese infrastructure investment now seeks solutions through planetary scale spatial reorganization. This isn't just some quantitative growth. It is a qualitative transformation in form. Every scale jump represents new forms of spatial organization, new institutional arrangements, new forms of debt finance, new political configurations to deal with all of it. And Harvey reconstructs how we've moved from city scale to potentially planetary spatial competition. He doesn't get to it, doesn't say it, but I think really the next step is about asteroid mining and planet movement and Until then, though, we can actually use this method to talk about shit happening now. There's this thing Trump's doing with the US semiconductor NVIDIA AI thing. Trump has promised Meta and OpenAI huge amount of money. And this isn't industrial policy. Not really. It's spatial fixed logic in action. American overcapacity in financial services, too much fucking money, and tech platforms with too much fucking money face Chinese manufacturing competition. So the solution, there it is, massive federal investment in domestic semiconductor production, huge, massive AI farms nightmares, new fabrication facilities, research institutions, supply chain reorganization, workforce training programs. But, yep, this spatial fix contains those predicted contradictions. Huge, massive fixed capital investments that can't be moved. Debt financing, again, through federal spending. Creation of potential overcapacity in all of this, while other sectors are really, really underinvested. The temporal displacement of crisis through spatial reorganization. And don't forget how the unemployed are gonna be a problem again. They want water pressure, not living in a hellscape of deafening noise. Welcome to the contradiction.
We came to Texas to find out what happens when a state becomes the center of the Bitcoin universe. You can hear quite a loud constant noise all around us.
24/7.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how loud is it right now?
This is about an 8.
So it gets worse than this.
It gets worse than this.
Remember the legal limit for noise is 85 decibels? And Cheryl showed us readings in her house into the hundreds.
This is inside of my house.
The cause is just a few hundred feet from the house owned by the Brownings, a massive Bitcoin mine.
The infrastructure dimension of the Ukraine conflict, especially lately, reveals competing spatial fix strategies. Russia's pipeline infrastructure represented spatial fix for hydrocarbon overcapacity. It moved surplus energy capital through territorial control. NATO infrastructure expansion represents competing spatial fixes, absorbing surplus military industrial capital through alliance system expansion. Each side seeks to force the other's spatial arrangement into full crisis while expanding their own territorial control over infrastructure networks. Yeah, Marx focused on this, on capitalism's temporal contradictions. Crises develop over time through overaccumulation, right? But Marx isn't the end of philosophy. That's Fukuyama. It's a method, instead, you build on. Harvey's innovation adds a spatial dimension, how crises move geographically or expand geographically through infrastructure investment, through territorial reorganization, scale jumping processes. That's not all. Harvey's actually extending Marx's value theory, analyzing how spatial fixes create anti-value, what he calls that a debt-financed infrastructure, right? It's never going to generate sufficient value to redeem the debt used to create it. It can't. We have Chinese ghost cities that are poorly built, American suburban sprawl collapsing, European renewable energy systems in crisis, all representing potential anti-value accumulation. So, how it goes is that spatial fixes create value through employment, construction, productivity, and anti-value, debt accumulation, overcapacity, environmental degradation. These things dance back and forth until it's too much and the stress is too much and a new spatial fix is needed. The political stakes here are really clear. Modern American frameworks, as we talk about them now, moralize geopolitical competition, and they completely miss how capital's overaccumulation problems systematically generate infrastructure competition and these crises. Whether it's through Chinese centralized state planning or American market mechanisms, surplus capital must find spatial outlets or crisis. America has had a few of these in my lifetime, many of them. It's safe to say we're about to maybe have more. And look, I'm not here to teach you Harvey. Harvey does a very good job of that himself. His books are everywhere. Well, they're right there. A YouTube video is in this description, actually. Same's true of Marx, except the YouTube video thing. I don't have a YouTube video that Marx hosts his own lectures. But here, what I'm trying to do with this series is different. I'm trying to show you something else, a method for thinking or dealing with thought that cuts through the garbage fire of contemporary political discourse. Everyone out there right now is screaming about, China's Belt and Road initiatives are an authoritarian expansion, or a necessary development, or good statecraft. Harvey's dialectical approach is actually to look at the systematic logic that everyone else misses entirely. Well, the base of it is simple. Appropriate material in detail, trace how things develop through their own internal contradictions, reconstruct the systematic relationships that make the development intelligible. That's it. Adding to it and creating concepts to build with is actually kind of just as simple. Oh wow, it seems space is needed. Let me go look at that. Figure that out. This process sidesteps the entire framework of liberal versus conservative, democratic versus authoritarian, good policy versus bad policy, all the categories that trap political discourse in endless moralizing cycles of arguments and garbage and debates. Instead, You ask, why does our world systematically produce these crises, these patterns? What internal necessities drive infrastructure competitions, regardless of political system in play? And why is this seemingly so common? And no, you probably won't end up right. You might just end up swinging for the fences and fucking it up really bad. But, I don't give a shit. Who gives a shit? There are no other solutions being offered. People aren't even trying to swing the goddamn bat, just yelling at each other over facts. And don't be a Piers, a Cenk, an Anna. All these useless political wastes that perversely enjoy having facts and hearing their own voice without any care for the whys. But also don't fight ideology. It's useless. Sidestep it. Focus on the systematic relationships that actually impact people. So whether you support or oppose American AI nationalism, Chinese infrastructure expansion, European green transitions, all these policies are secondary to understanding how accumulation imperatives actually generate these fucking problems themselves. And doing this, sidestepping it, does not make you neutral. Worse, it makes you dangerous. It makes you capable of analysis that isn't trapped within predetermined political categories and narratives. It makes you capable of maybe even changing something. And once you grasp this method, you can apply it anywhere. There's cultural analysis, technological development, institutional change, whatever systematic process you encounter. It's philosophy not as thinking, not as thought, but as practical analytical tool, not academic content consumption. It's that uncomfortable space between the perverts and the paranoiacs, between the people who enjoy hearing their own voice and those who can't explain how to tie their shoes without 90 different citations that maybe they didn't even read. It's the space I've been trying to build with the Quarantine Collective for over 5 years and will continue to be. And maybe we can change something, maybe we can't. After a long few weeks, I feel like I need a change myself. This has been a pretty difficult few weeks. Some really hard political Marxist writings and readings. And David Harvey's wonderful, but God. So next week, it's going to be a fun break as we head into something not wildly different, but more fun. The thought of psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan. And it's fun because we're going to do it with Zizek, right alongside Alfred Hitchcock. I can't wait. Meanwhile, if you got anything out of this, please support the channel. Would adore it. Subscribe, like it, all of that stuff. But if you can, head over to Patreon at patreon.com/DGQC, because apparently even dialectical analysis requires spatial fixes to absorb surplus intellectual labor. Yeah, as always, see y'all soon enough.